My mother saw me before the bride did. She was standing beneath a chandelier at a vineyard resort in Virginia, smiling for 200 guests as if she had personally arranged the sunset. Then her eyes found me across the marble lobby, and the smile remained while everything behind it turned to ice. She crossed the room without hurrying. "You are not allowed to be here," she said softly. 9 years had passed since Catherine Mercer last spoke to me. That was her first sentence. 3 weeks earlier, a cream envelope had arrived at the house Adrian and I shared. The calligraphy read, Dr. Adrian Cole and Mrs. Evelyn Cole. 2 seats had opened on the groom's guest list, and Benjamin Hale had asked his mother to invite us. The invitation had arrived late because 2 honored guests from Ben's side had canceled. A detail so ordinary that no one in Natalie's carefully managed world had thought to investigate it. He had recently learned that Harborlight Foundation had funded the training program that helped him complete his geriatric fellowship. He knew Adrian as a physician mentor. He knew me as the founder behind Harborlight. He did not know I was the bride's younger sister. Natalie did not know Mrs. Evelyn Cole was the sister she had erased. I had chosen a simple olive suit for the wedding, quiet enough to disappear among silk dresses and black tuxedos. I had not come to confront anyone. I had come because Ben had invited us with genuine gratitude. And because declining would have meant allowing my family to control one more doorway in my life. Adrian was checking our coats when I entered the reception hall alone. That was when I saw Aunt Marianne. She stood beside a table of champagne glasses, wearing silver earrings I remembered from childhood Christmas dinners. Our eyes met. Recognition moved across her face immediately. Her lips parted, almost shaping my name. Then she looked away. That hurt more than surprise would have. My family had not forgotten me. Forgetting is accidental. They had remembered me clearly and chosen silence, because silence was easier than courage. Catherine stopped in front of me. "I was invited," I said. "Not by this family." "No," I answered. "By the one your daughter is marrying into." For 1 second, her expression changed. Not guilt, calculation. Before she could respond, Natalie appeared in white silk. Her bouquet held tightly against her waist. She looked beautiful in the controlled, polished way she had looked in every family photograph. Then she saw me, and the color left her face. "You need to leave before they find out," she whispered. The words mattered more than the command. Before they find out, not before you make a scene, not before the ceremony begins, before they find out I existed. I pressed my thumb against the glass face of Grandma June's old nursing watch. I had done that for years whenever I needed to remember that someone had once known my value without asking for proof. I did not argue with Natalie. "You should ask your husband who is on his guest list," I said, across the lobby. Adrian had begun walking toward us. Several doctors from St. Matthew recognized him and greeted him by name. Catherine noticed. Natalie noticed too. A wedding coordinator approached with our place cards, unaware that she was carrying a small explosive. She handed mine to Catherine by mistake. Catherine looked down. Table 2, beside Dr. Margaret Hale, the groom's mother. My mother had spent 9 years removing my name from every version of our family story. In that moment, she understood that another family had placed it in a seat of honor. The house where I grew up had a hallway that taught us what mattered before anyone said it aloud. 11 frames hung along the first floor, each one polished and evenly spaced. My grandfather's medical degree occupied the center. Beside it were board certifications, research awards, fellowship portraits, and photographs of Mercer relatives in white coats. all arranged like evidence in a case the family had already won. The 12th frame hung at the end. It was empty. When I was 13, I asked my mother why. "That one is yours," Catherine said, "for the day you do something worthy of this family." She said it without cruelty. That was her gift. She could make a judgment sound like a future opportunity. For years, I passed that frame every morning and felt it measuring me. Natalie never seemed to notice it. She had no reason to. Her accomplishments already appeared in temporary frames on the console beneath the wall. Science prizes, honor society certificates, photographs from academic competitions. My mother called them previews. In our home, achievement was not celebrated. It was translated into belonging, and belonging was distributed according to rank, prestige, and obedience, without apology or exception. I was good at different things, the kinds that did not photograph well. One Sunday, when I was 16, Grandma June became dizzy at dinner and dropped her water glass. It struck the edge of her plate and spilled across the tablecloth. Everyone moved at once, but not in the same direction. My father asked whether she had taken her morning medication. My uncle named 3 possible cardiac causes. Catherine asked for her blood pressure and began debating whether the dizziness could be positional. Natalie searched symptoms on her phone and started listing warning signs. I moved Grandma's chair away from the broken glass. I helped her sit back with both feet supported. I asked whether she had eaten lunch. I checked the time and wrote down when the dizziness began. Then I brought her medication bag from the guest room. The newest bottle had a different label. "Grandma," I said, "did they change your blood pressure dose?" She nodded. "Yesterday." The room became quiet. Catherine checked the prescription, then called June's physician. The new dose was likely too strong. Grandma improved after lying down, drinking water, and eating something salty while the adults revised their theories. She squeezed my hand. "This whole table knows the name of every disease," she said. Only Evie remembered to ask what the patient needed. A few people laughed softly. Catherine did not. "Instinct for caregiving is useful," she said. "It is not a substitute for education." That sentence followed me for 2 years. My high school graduation dinner was held at a private club in Richmond. 20 relatives attended. My name appeared on the menu cards, but the evening belonged to Natalie before the main course arrived. Catherine stood and announced that Natalie had been accepted to medical school. Everyone rose. My father toasted the next Dr. Mercer. My uncle began discussing residencies. Someone asked Natalie which specialty she planned to choose. The waiter placed a slice of cake in front of me while the entire table faced my sister. Inside my bag was the certificate from the nursing assistant program I had completed on weekends. I had paid for it with money from an after-school job. It was the first credential I had earned entirely for myself. When we returned home, I carried it to the hallway. I opened the empty frame, placed the certificate behind the glass, and stepped back. For several seconds, it looked right. Catherine came downstairs, saw it, and removed it in front of me. "This is not the kind of achievement that belongs on this wall." She handed the certificate back as carefully as if it were something fragile and embarrassing. That night, Grandma June found me on the back porch. She removed the old nurse's watch from her wrist and fastened it around mine. The metal was warm from her skin. "This watch has counted the pulses of people no one ever asked where they went to school," she said. Then she looked through the window toward the hallway. "Do not confuse being highly regarded with being loved." She did not explain further. She did not need to. The empty frame had never proved that I had failed. It proved that my family knew how to recognize only one kind of worth. 1 year later, my mother gave me a choice: leave caregiving or leave the family. By the time my mother gave me her ultimatum, I had finished my CNA training and was working for a home care company on the west side of Richmond. I loved the work. Most of my clients did not need dramatic rescues. They needed someone who arrived when promised, noticed the milk had expired, listened when medication made them dizzy, and understood that loneliness could become as dangerous as a loose rug. None of those things earned a place on my family's polished wall, but they mattered. That was the part Catherine could not forgive. She could have tolerated failure. Failure could be corrected, explained, or hidden. What she could not tolerate was the possibility that I had found a life outside the future she had designed for me and was happy there. I liked the quiet order of evening visits. I liked learning how each client preferred the room arranged, how much sugar went into a cup of tea, which stories had to be heard again, because memory made them new each time. I liked helping people without asking them to prove they deserved help. At 19, I still lived in my parents' house and paid for my own certification, uniforms, and transportation. I believed the education fund created in my name would eventually help me study nursing or healthcare administration. My father corrected that belief on a Tuesday evening. Thomas called me into his study and placed a folder on the desk. He explained that the account contained a little over $80,000. It was a 529 plan, he said. He owned it. I was only the beneficiary. Then he told me he had changed the beneficiary to Natalie. Her medical school expenses were higher than expected, and the money had already been reassigned. Catherine stood beside the window with her arms folded. Money has to be placed where it has the best chance of producing results, she said. I looked at my father, waiting for him to disagree with the language. If not the decision. He studied the folder. Catherine gave me 30 days to choose. I could leave my caregiving job, enroll in a pre-medical program, and return to what she called the family trajectory, or I could move out. I did not need 30 days. That night, I packed my clothes, certification papers, and Grandma June's watch into 2 borrowed suitcases. Thomas passed my bedroom twice without entering. When I carried the second suitcase downstairs, he finally stepped close enough to touch my coat. He slipped an envelope into the pocket. For years, I remembered that gesture as evidence that some part of him had tried to save me. At the front door, Catherine watched me put on my shoes. "You are choosing to become someone no one will remember," she said. I looked back at the hallway and the empty frame. "No," I said. "I am choosing to become someone you no longer get to grade." Neither parent answered. The porch light went dark before I reached the sidewalk. I rented a narrow room above a laundromat where the floor vibrated during the spin cycle. The first night, I opened my father's envelope. Inside were $200 and a printed list of 3 cheap boarding houses. There was no note, no private phone number, no address where I could contact him without going through my mother. No sentence that said, "I am sorry." He had not helped me resist cruelty. He had purchased the right to believe he was not entirely cruel. My first regular night client was Harold Webb, an 82-year-old former music teacher recovering from a stroke. His right hand no longer obeyed him, and buttons turned every morning into a private humiliation. The first time I helped him dress, I buttoned his entire shirt quickly. He frowned. "I still have one good hand," he said. The next night, I held the fabric steady while he worked each button through its hole. It took 12 minutes. I learned not to hurry him. I learned that care was not doing everything for someone. It was protecting the part they could still do for themselves. Some nights, Dignity was the final button, fastened without assistance. The agency, however, kept failing people like Harold. Caregivers arrived late. Schedules changed without warning. Families called and received no answer. Important details disappeared between shifts. So I bought a spiral notebook. After every visit, I wrote down what had gone wrong and what should have happened instead. Years later, those pages became the first blueprint for Harborlight. In 2021, 6 years after I left home, Grandma June had a stroke. I learned about it from a former neighbor who still had my number. By then, June had been moved to an inpatient hospice facility outside Richmond. Pandemic restrictions were still in place, and the facility allowed each patient only 2 fixed visitors. Grandma could no longer speak or make decisions for herself. Catherine held her medical power of attorney. She listed herself and Thomas. My name was not on the form. I drove there anyway. I parked beneath a row of bare trees and sat with hands on the steering wheel, rehearsing calm explanations, as though the right arrangement of words might turn policy, authority, and 9 years of silence into mercy. The receptionist was kind enough to look uncomfortable. She checked the list twice, then explained that the facility could not replace a designated visitor without approval from the legal representative. I knew she was following policy. I knew the nurse beside her had probably delivered the same sentence to other families all week. So I did not shout. I did not demand a supervisor. I stood at the desk in my work clothes, holding Grandma June's old watch against my wrist, and asked whether someone could at least tell her I had come. The nurse said she would try. I called my father from the parking lot. Thomas did not answer. I called again. Nothing. Then I sent Catherine a message. Please let me have 10 minutes with her. Her reply arrived 4 minutes later. She needs peace, not more conflict. I read the sentence until the words stopped looking like language. 10 days later, Grandma June died. The same neighbor told me after the funeral had already taken place. There is a kind of grief that comes from losing someone. There is another kind that comes from being prevented from saying goodbye. The second one leaves no final image, no last touch, no proof that the person knew you tried. A week before her stroke, Grandma had left me a voicemail. It lasted 47 seconds. I listened to the beginning the night I learned she was gone. Evie, there is something no one ever told your mother, and I'm afraid one day she may ask you to forgive her before she is willing to tell you the truth. I stopped to the recording. My thumb moved before I had made a decision. For years, I told myself I was protecting the memory of her voice. The truth was more complicated. I was afraid she would ask me to go home. I was afraid she would ask me to forgive Catherine. I was afraid the woman who had loved me best would turn that love into one final obligation to reconcile with people who had never admitted what they had done. So I saved the voicemail. I backed it up. I carried it through new phones and software updates, but I never let it reach the end. Years later, I tried to explain that to Adrian. As long as the message has not finished, I told him. She is still speaking. When it ends, she becomes completely past tense. Hein did not tell me that was irrational. He did not offer to listen for me. He simply made another backup and handed the phone back. 6 months after June's death, grief stopped feeling like a room I was trapped inside and started feeling like material I could build with. I had $12,000 in savings, most of it gathered from night shifts and weekend work. A local credit union approved a small business loan after 3 larger banks declined me. 4 caregivers from my old agency agreed to join before I had an office, a logo, or enough money to promise them full schedules. I called the company Harborlight Home Support. We provided non-medical care only, help with bathing, meals, mobility, transportation, companionship, and the 1,000 ordinary tasks that determine whether an older person can remain safely at home. We did not provide skilled nursing. We referred those needs to licensed clinical providers and documented every handoff. My first operating rule was simple. No family should have to call a third time before someone answers. At the beginning, that someone was usually me. I answered calls from the laundromat stairs, from grocery store parking lots, and once from the floor of an empty office while assembling a desk with the wrong screwdriver. We were small, but we showed up. 2 years later, Harborlight received a call from a trauma surgeon about a patient no other agency would accept. His name was Dr. Adrian Cole. The patient was Rosa Delgado, 76, recovering from a hip fracture and scheduled to leave St. Matthews the following morning. She had spent 30 years cleaning hotel rooms and disliked asking strangers for help. The chart described her as cooperative. It did not mention that she nodded whenever she felt embarrassed, or that everyone had mistaken that nod for complete understanding. On paper, the discharge plan looked complete. A walker had been ordered. Prescriptions were ready. Her daughter had agreed to stay with her. A home care agency was listed for evening support. Adrian believed the hospital needed only 2 more days to stabilize the arrangement. I believed the arrangement had never been stable. Rosa's daughter worked nights at a packaging plant and slept during the day. Their house had 3 front steps and no handrail. Rosa could speak English, but she did not read it well enough to follow medication labels. Every prescription had been printed only in English. The previous agency had already missed 2 visits, which explained why Rosa became silent whenever anyone mentioned going home. 2 days will not fix the house, I told Adrian. We need to fix the plan. He looked at me across the conference table, not offended, exactly, but unused to being corrected by someone without a hospital badge. What would you change? I found a Spanish-speaking caregiver who could begin that evening. I created a medication schedule using colors, photographs, and times instead of dense instructions. Harborlight arranged a temporary handrail while Rosa's landlord approved permanent installation. I spoke with her daughter during her work break and divided responsibilities around her actual schedule, not the version written in the chart. We also scheduled a check-in call 24 hours after discharge and another visit the following morning. Rosa went home the next day. Before I left the unit, Adrian asked how long it had taken me to find every problem. Not long, I said. I asked her what frightened her most about going home. That was the first argument we had. It was not the last. Adrian noticed Grandma June's watch during our second case together. He did not ask why I had never become a nurse. He asked who the watch had belonged to. No physician had ever asked me that before. Coffee after difficult discharges became a habit. We disagreed about risk, staffing, documentation, and whether hospitals understood what happened after patients crossed their own front doors. Sometimes I won, sometimes he did. Neither of us pretended otherwise. Over the next 2 years, Adrian watched Harborlight grow. He helped carry file cabinets when we moved into a larger office, arrived in surgical scrubs, and spent an hour trying to fit a cabinet through a doorway before admitting I had measured correctly. Before we married, I told him everything about the Mercers, the empty frame, the education fund, Grandma June, the hospice list, and the voicemail I could not finish. He never told me to forgive them. He only said, "You built a family business. The family part came later." I sent my parents a wedding invitation anyway, It came back opened and resealed. On the back, in Catherine's handwriting, were 8 words: "Do not turn your wedding into a request." I kept the envelope, not because I believed it would change them, but because I had spent too many years pretending certain wounds had not happened. Harborlight expanded carefully. We began with personal support and daily living assistance. Then, St. Matthews gave us a small transition of care contract. 2 years later, we acquired a struggling local agency instead of building every office from nothing. Eventually, we operated across 3 neighboring states with nearly 300 active caregivers, most working flexible shifts rather than full-time schedules. The size mattered less to me than the systems. Calls were returned. Missed visits triggered immediate backup coverage. Caregivers were included in discharge meetings when families agreed. No one was treated as invisible simply because their work happened outside a hospital. Harborlight Foundation was created after the company became stable enough to fund more than payroll. St. Matthews wanted support for a training position and research project focused on older patients returning home after hospitalization. I agreed on one condition. The fund would carry Grandma June's name. The June Parker Geriatric Transitions Fund paid part of a trainee's salary and supported research on safer discharges. My name appeared nowhere in the public announcement. The first recipient was Dr. Benjamin Hale. 3 years later, Ben mailed an invitation addressed to Adrian and me. He was marrying Natalie Mercer. The invitation lay open between Adrian and me for nearly an hour before either of us spoke. Benjamin Hale was marrying Natalie Mercer. Adrian read the names again, then looked at me carefully. "You do not have to go. I know. That is not the same as wanting to." I folded the invitation along its original crease. "I am not going so they can see me," I said. "I am going because the person who invited me has never treated me like a secret." We made rules at the kitchen table. We would not confront anyone. We would not hide the truth. I would not repeat suspicions I could not prove. If the situation became cruel or unsafe, we would leave together. We also agreed that Adrian would never speak for me. Those rules felt simple in our kitchen. They felt different inside the Vineyard Resort, with my mother staring at my place card and Natalie watching every movement as if I were carrying evidence beneath my jacket. After Catherine discovered I had been seated at table 2, she guided me toward a side corridor with one hand lightly touching my elbow. To anyone watching, she looked like a mother escorting a daughter through a crowded wedding. Thomas was waiting near the service entrance. There were 9 years in the way he avoided my eyes. "The kitchen corridor leads to the parking lot," he said. "You can leave without disturbing the ceremony." I looked at the gray metal door behind him. 9 years ago, I left my own home with my belongings in garbage bags. I said, "I will never leave another place through the back door just to make you more comfortable." His face tightened. "This is Natalie's wedding, and I did not come to damage it." Catherine stepped closer. "Then tell anyone who asks that you are one of Adrian's colleagues. Stay for the ceremony if you insist, and leave before the reception." I thought of the rules Adrian and I had made. "I will not create a scene," I said. "But I will not lie to protect your story." My mother's expression changed at the word story. Before she could answer, a woman in deep blue silk entered the corridor. I recognized Dr. Margaret Hale from hospital events. Though we had never been properly introduced, she was Ben's mother and St. Matthew's chief medical officer. "Evelyn Cole," she said, offering her hand. "Ben speaks highly of Harborlight." Her warmth was direct rather than performative. We exchanged a few words about discharge care, then she glanced toward the ballroom, where Natalie was posing for photographs. "How do you know Natalie?" The corridor seemed to narrow. Catherine inhaled beside me. I answered before she could. "Natalie is my sister. We have not spoken in 9 years. I do not know what she has told your family, so the rest is something you should ask her." Margaret did not display shock. Her hand remained relaxed around mine. "Thank you for answering directly." She released me and returned to the ballroom. Catherine turned on me. "You had no right. I answered a question about my own life." Adrian appeared at the end of the corridor. One look at my face was enough. He came to stand beside me without speaking. The wedding coordinator called for the immediate family to gather. Catherine and Thomas left first. Natalie remained near the floral arch, adjusting her veil while photographers changed lenses. From the last row, I watched Margaret approach her. I could not hear the beginning, but I saw Natalie's posture stiffen. Margaret moved closer and asked clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Is there anything you need to tell Ben before you make your vows?" Natalie looked across the garden toward Catherine. My mother answered from several feet away. "There is nothing." Margaret kept her eyes on Natalie. For one moment, my sister had a clean opening. No microphone, no audience demanding details. No punishment had occurred yet. She could have taken Ben aside and told him whatever truth she believed he deserved. Instead, she lowered her bouquet and said nothing. The ceremony began beneath an arch of white roses. Natalie walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. Ben looked at her with complete trust. When it was time for their vows, she held his hands and said, "I promise always to be honest with you." The guests smiled. Several people wiped their eyes. I looked toward Margaret Hale. She was the only person in the first row who did not applaud. The reception began with music, candlelight, and the careful illusion that nothing had changed. I sat beside Adrian at table 2, while servers carried plates through the room and guests moved between conversations about hospitals, research, and private practice. Natalie smiled for photographs, thanked relatives, and accepted congratulations with the polished ease she had learned long before medical school. But the longer I watched, the more the story around her began to feel incomplete. There were surgeons from Ben's side, internists from St. Matthew's, former professors, hospital administrators, and 2 physicians who had trained with Adrian. Not one person was introduced as a colleague from Natalie's dermatology residency. Several guests asked about the clinic she was supposedly opening. Catherine answered each question with details about Natalie's years in medical school, her academic awards, and how demanding specialty training had been. No one seemed to know the clinic's address. A pediatrician asked Natalie whether she planned to focus on medical dermatology or cosmetic procedures. Before Natalie could answer, Catherine touched the doctor's arm and redirected the conversation toward Ben's fellowship. Later, I heard Natalie describe her current work as consulting. She did not name a company. Any one of those details could have meant nothing. Together, they formed a silence with edges. I did not know what had happened. I only knew the version of Natalie presented to the room had missing pages, and every missing page seemed guarded by my mother. She found me near the hallway outside the bridal suite. Her smile remained in place until the door closed behind us. "What did you tell Margaret?" "I told her you are my sister. You are trying to destroy my wedding." I answered one question about my own life. Natalie pressed both hands against the dressing table. "You think you are the only person Mother ever graded?" The bitterness in her voice surprised me. She looked at her reflection instead of at me. "When I left residency, Mother told me not to tell anyone until she decided how to explain it. She said people forgive a pause, but they remember failure." I said nothing. She told everyone I stepped away to take care of her after her hands got worse. She wrote the biography for the hospital gala. She handled the emails from people asking when I was returning. She corrected me whenever I described my job. If I said I worked in medical communications, she called it consulting. If someone asked about a practice, she said it was still in development. Natalie's voice had lowered. At first, I thought it would last a few months. Then every dinner, every introduction, every photograph depended on the same version. I have lived inside that story so long, I do not know how to leave without taking everything down with me. For the first time that day, I did not see the bride my mother had perfected. I saw my sister at 17, rehearsing a valedictorian speech while Catherine corrected the angle of her shoulders. Natalie turned toward me. You were allowed to leave that house. I had to stay and become proof that mother raised successful children. No, I said. I was not allowed to leave. I was thrown out. But eventually, I stopped asking permission to live. Her face tightened as if I had denied her the only mercy she expected. Please go before the speeches. Ben will ask questions. His mother already is. I will not tell him your secret, Natalie exhaled. But I will not disappear so you can keep lying. That is the same thing. It is not. She looked toward the ballroom doors. You have no idea what mother will do if this becomes public. I know exactly what she does when truth threatens the story. I lived through it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I understood then that Natalie had also been harmed by our mother's system. She had been rewarded, displayed, and trapped inside it. But control explained her choices. It did not erase them. Margaret had offered her a private chance to tell Ben the truth, and Natalie had chosen silence. A knock sounded at the door. The wedding coordinator announced that the speeches were beginning. Natalie straightened her shoulders automatically. We returned to the ballroom separately. The master of ceremonies welcomed the guests, thanked both families, and invited Catherine to speak first. My mother rose with a champagne glass in her hand. She smiled across the room and began talking about a family in which everything had to be earned. Catherine began with legacy. She spoke of 2 medical families joining, of standards preserved across generations, of discipline, honesty, and the privilege of carrying a name that had been earned before any of us were born. She praised Natalie as a daughter who had never lowered the bar and had never given her family reason to doubt her. Then she raised her glass. In our family, no place is given freely. Every position must be earned. The room answered with polite applause. Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass touched its saucer with a click. I had heard those words before, though not always in my mother's voice. Grandma June once told me Catherine's father had made her report her class rank at Sunday dinner. He had treated affection like a scholarship, renewed only when performance remained high. For one brief moment, I saw my mother not as the woman who had erased me, but as the girl who had learned that love could be withdrawn without warning. I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered that understanding a wound does not require kneeling before the person who passed it on. Catherine sat. The master of ceremonies introduced Ben. He stood beside Natalie with a folded page in one hand, thanked both families, and spoke first about Adrian. Dr. Cole taught me that caring for an older trauma patient does not end when the surgery ends. He said. It ends when that person can return home safely, with dignity, and with a plan that works outside the hospital. Adrian lowered his head as the room applauded. Ben continued. He thanked Harborlight Foundation for supporting his training salary and funding his research on older patients after discharge. He said the project had taught him what charts often missed: Stairs without railings, daughters working night shifts, medication instructions no one could read, and caregivers who understood patients long after physicians stopped seeing them. Then he mentioned the fund's name. The June Parker Geriatric Transitions Fund honors a hospice nurse who worked more than 40 years and believed care was not lesser medicine. It was the part that remained when titles left the room. My thumb pressed against the glass of her watch. Ben smiled toward table 2. The founder never allowed the hospital to publish her name, but she is here tonight. My body went still before I could stop it. Evelyn Cole, he said, would you stand? Every face in the ballroom turned toward me. I rose because Ben was looking at me with gratitude, not pity. Catherine stood immediately. There has been a misunderstanding, she said with a light laugh. Evelyn is only a distant relative. The sentence landed harder than the insult at the door. Natalie pushed back from the head table. She was not invited. Ben turned toward her. I invited her. His voice remained calm, which made the silence sharper. She founded Harborlight. Her foundation funded my position. June Parker was her grandmother. Adrian is my mentor. Why would she not be invited? Margaret rose beside him. Natalie, she said, you told Ben you had no siblings. Natalie looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at the guests. No one answered. Then a chair scraped across the floor. Aunt Marianne stood near the back of the room. Her face had gone pale, but her voice carried. Enough. Catherine, Evelyn is your daughter. We all know it. The ballroom became completely still. For 9 years, no one in my family had said publicly that I belonged to them. The first person to do it was the woman who had looked away when I entered. Marianne's honesty did not erase her silence, but it broke it. Catherine turned toward her. This is not your concern. It became my concern every time I knew and said nothing. Natalie's breathing had changed. She gripped the edge of the table as if the room had tilted. Mother said it was better if they did not know, she said. She said if Ben learned about Evie, he would start asking questions about Mercy General. Catherine's head snapped toward her. Natalie stopped. Too late. Ben looked at his wife. What happened at Mercy General? No one moved. I had not mentioned the residency. I had not spoken about the missing colleagues, the clinic without an address, or the story Catherine kept answering for Natalie. I had told only the truth that belonged to me. The rest had found its own way into the room. Catherine crossed the space between us and took my arm. Come with me, she said. She pulled me into the corridor and closed the doors behind us. Then, for the first time in 9 years, my mother offered me a way back home. The corridor was empty except for the music leaking through the closed ballroom doors. Catherine released my arm and faced me with the urgency of someone trying to contain a fire before the smoke reached the guests. You are going back in there, she said. You will explain that we have always kept in private contact. You will say the June Parker Fund was a family project. Your father advised Harborlight. Whatever happened between us was personal and has been misunderstood. I stared at her. She continued quickly, building the solution as if the truth were simply a scheduling error. You will come home for Thanksgiving, Christmas too. We will take new family photographs. The empty frame can finally be filled. Your company, the foundation, all of it will be recognized properly. We can tell people the distance was necessary because of your work. We can say privacy protected everyone. No one needs to know about the returned invitation, the hospice list, or why your name was not spoken at our table for 9 years. Not ever again. Her voice softened. You finally proved that I was wrong about you. For one painful second, I saw everything I had once wanted arranged behind her words. My name restored, a chair at Sunday dinner, my photograph on the wall, my mother introducing me without shame. Then I understood the price. She was not asking me to come home. She was asking me to help repair the version of the family that had excluded me. "You still do not understand," I said. If Harborlight had failed in its first year, if I were still living above the laundromat, if I were still working night shifts for low wages, what you did to me would still have been wrong. But you became someone worth being proud of. I did not need to become someone worth being proud of. I was your daughter. That should have been enough. Something in her face shifted. For the first time that evening, she looked less like the woman who controlled every room and more like someone trapped inside an old one. "My father made me report my class rank at Sunday dinner," she said. "Every week, if I dropped, he wanted an explanation. Those standards were how I survived." "No," I said. "You survived despite them. Then you turned your wound into a law for both your daughters." She looked toward the ballroom doors. "We can discuss that later. Right now, you need to protect this family." There it was. She had been offered the truth and still chosen the image. I opened the doors and returned to the reception. The room had not recovered. Ben stood beside Margaret. Natalie remained near the head table, pale and silent. Adrian waited at the edge of the aisle. I faced Margaret first, then Ben, then the guests. "I was born Evelyn Mercer," I said. "When I was 20, I was told that love in that family had to be earned. I spent years trying to prove them wrong before realizing I was still living by their rules." No one interrupted. "I will not tell Natalie's story for her. Whatever happened at Mercy General is hers to explain. But I will not lie about who I am or pretend that 9 years of silence were closeness." I turned to Catherine. "Leave the frame empty. I do not live in front of that wall anymore." Her mouth opened, but no words came. Adrian held out his hand. I took it. We walked down the center aisle while 200 guests watched, not through the kitchen corridor, not through the service entrance, through the front doors, beneath the name of the resort carved into the stone. Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled of wet grass and grapevines. The reception glowed behind the windows, beautiful from a distance, as controlled things often are. My hands began to shake only then. Adrian placed his jacket around my shoulders and waited. I took out my phone. The voicemail was still there, saved through 6 years and 3 devices. June Parker, 47 seconds. I pressed play. When Grandma's voice reached the sentence that had stopped me every time before, I kept my thumb at my side. For the first time, I let her finish. Grandma June's voice came through the phone, thinner than I remembered, but steady. "Evie, there is something no one ever told your mother. Her father taught her that love was a prize for the winner. One day, she may ask you to forgive her before she is willing to tell you the truth. You do not have to do that. Forgiveness is not the price of peace. You were never the empty frame. You were the only person in that house who understood that a home is built to protect people, not display achievements." She paused. "Do not wait for the person holding the scorecard to tell you what you are worth." The message ended. I cried for the first time that day, not because I had lost my family, but because I had finally stopped waiting for them to become a different one. 6 weeks later, Bun and Natalie were living separately. After Natalie provided documents to his attorney, Ben learned that she had left her residency. The promised clinic did not exist, and several professional and financial claims had been misrepresented. He filed for divorce. He did not announce an annulment at the wedding, and no one's life collapsed neatly in a single evening. Catherine resigned from the hospital's fundraising board after her credibility weakened in the community. She was not fired from medicine or stripped of credentials. She simply lost the social authority she had spent years protecting. Thomas sent me one email. "Grandma June would have been proud of you." I read it twice and did not answer. Marianne came to Harborlight and apologized without defending herself. "I believe you regret it," I told her. But regret does not make 9 years of silence innocent. A year later, Adrian and I hosted Sunday dinner. The table held our first caregivers, Rosa and her daughter, Ben, several friends, and one empty chair for whoever might need it next. The potatoes were late, someone spilled water, and no one reported a promotion, grade, salary, or title. Instead, I asked, "Was there a moment this week when you needed someone to truly show up?" People answered honestly. No answer was ranked, corrected, or turned into evidence that someone deserved more room than anyone else at the table. On the dining room wall hung the old frame Natalie had mailed me. Inside it, I placed a photograph of Grandma June laughing on her porch. Natalie's note said, "You were right, the frame was never empty. We were taught to look at it wrong." I had not fully forgiven her. Healing did not require me to close every door. It required the freedom to decide which ones opened, when, and for whom. I once believed freedom would arrive when my family finally recognized my value. I was wrong. Freedom arrived when they recognized it, and I no longer needed to turn around and check. Their wall still exists. My frame remained empty for years. But a frame can define you only while you stand before it, waiting for someone else to decide what deserves to be displayed. If anyone has ever made you prove you were worthy of staying, comment, "Front door," not to punish them, but to remind yourself that you do not have to leave your own life through the back. Share this story with someone exhausted from earning love that should have been given freely. And subscribe for more stories about people who stopped begging for a seat at the old table and began building one of their own.